said that in a job interview in the last month. I said the word shizzle, and the candidate that we were interviewing said, "Are we recording now?"
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
What did the candidate say?
The candidate said, "Did you really just say the shizzle?"
Yeah.
I'm like, "I did."
2008 called, bro.
Yeah.
They want their word back. Hello, everyone.
We're back.
We're back.
Same clothes.
Oddly enough, same clothes. I was thinking about how people might start to pick up like, oh, he's worn that shirt before. I only have so many things I can wear. For you, you've been in the rotation of the same 3 shirts, I swear. Like
I know I haven't worn this one,
you totally have.
but I have other navy blue shirts.
Okay,
so
that's what
sweaters.
it is.
But
And then you got your orange one, and then you got like a gray one. So I think you got 3 colors that you just
Probably.
sort of rotate through.
yeah.
Which consistency is key. So
When I teach classes at the U, there's a part of me that wants to, like, I usually teach my classes once a week, and I want to take a picture of what I'm wearing each week, so that they're like, "Is that all he
Yeah.
wears?" So
there's a famous Vine. Vine used to be.
yeah, I'm with it.
Okay.
I'm with it.
Yeah.
Shizzle,
Yeah.
Shizzle, and Vine were like cousins.
Clearly. And it's just a series of it's the teacher walking into his class. And so it's like day after day after day. And he just does the same routine. He walks and he says, "Hello, hello." And it's just a new shirt each time. But then after 4 times, it's like he rotates the shirts. And it's just this like, it's a beautiful
Compressed.
encapsulation
Yeah.
of like, this guy does the same thing each day. He's probably got like 4 shirts. He's got his go-to, "Hello."
Sounds like me.
So before we'd started podcasting, Dr. Steve, you had asked a question that I said, "Hey, you should ask me that question on the podcast."
Yeah, and my question was, are you breaking up with me?
Yeah.
What my comment, my observation was, it feels like you may be getting to a point where you're not you're not in a position where you need therapy as much.
I definitely have felt that way, and I told Dr. Steve this. This is a new thing. This has been within the last couple of weeks. Like, this is the first time in my life where I've gone, 2 weeks without seeing George, which to everyone listening, they're probably like, "Well, that's not that much time, Alex."
Right.
But to me, that's a big deal, because after, one missed session, I would be sort of angsty, and I'd have all these things stuck in my head, and I'd have I could feel it physically. I need to go to therapy. But this last month I've been okay, and I don't know if that's a combination of things. Like we talked about, having Haley in my life is super stabilizing, and then
Right.
also I've been busting my butt trying to get my company off the ground, and a lot of the work has been sort of fruitless at the start. But things are slowly starting to pick up, and it's like, okay, maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe this idea isn't stupid. Maybe it is viable.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of taking away anxiety. So,
But you're also you meet with George
yeah.
occasionally. You've got an EMDR person that's
Well,
been
I haven't seen them in a couple of weeks either.
doing things. You've got this podcast,
Yeah.
with its limitations, but I think we hit on things as well. You've got some couples work that you do occasionally, right?
Yeah. Yep.
It's
A lot of.
It's a lot. So,
There are times where I have 4 in a week, 4 therapy sessions in a week.
Yeah.
Which that's just not sustainable. That is. So yeah.
not sustainable from a financial, from
an
emotional
emotional
standpoint.
energy.
Yeah.
Also financially too.
Yeah, that's a chunk of change.
Yeah.
I mean,
Although, and I cannot imagine what it would have been like before Obamacare, because with, I believe a part of Obamacare was getting mental health covered by insurance. So with my insurance, I pay a $25 copay,
nice.
which that is,
Huge.
that is doable. I
Yeah.
can make that work.
Yeah.
If it was $100 a session or
Yeah.
$150, it's like,
Right.
no, you can't go to therapy.
Right.
So long answer short, things have just been progressing to the point where it's like, okay, I feel like I've experienced enough. Maybe I've sat with anxiety and things enough to be like, okay, this is normal. Talking with you has helped in the sense of this notion of like mastery versus acceptance. So this idea of acceptance is I think assisting me in terms of
Yeah.
being comfortable with what I'm feeling.
I mean, it's interesting because one of the big things that we've talked about in here, and one of the big things my understanding is that you've worked on with George, is this thing called dissociation.
Mm-hmm.
This part of you that felt at a very young age that a piece of you left, right? That there was a part of me that left, and I've been feeling kind of separated from the rest of humanity, and like I'm this oddball, or I have this weirdness about me. My sense, my guess is probably that dissociation has not ended for you, that you still have moments when you're in touch with it. But like you said, acceptance versus mastery, right? Maybe I can't master this dissociation, but maybe I've come to accept that this is a necessary part or an inevitable part of my existence, and I could fret about it, or I could move on and conduct my business, get my business off the ground, and have time with my family, or have whatever.
I agree, and this is a wonderful segue. I don't know if you planned this or not.
Of course, everything's planned.
Everything's planned, but so the last session I had with my EMDR lady, we didn't do an EMDR. I'm still doing the prep work, but we spent a lot of time talking about it and this idea of how EMDR is helpful with compulsions is what she calls it. Just compulsive thoughts, obsessive thoughts.
Yeah.
In that work, I wanted to talk a bit about. Also, though, before we get into that, I, to the point of planting roots and building a family, I put in very first home offer ever.
Oh.
Yeah, first time. So that was last night, which will be, we're not going to get into the whole time. Time is relative on this podcast. But that was just exciting. I've been thinking more about okay, I'm going to have a family soon. I'm going to get married. We're going to have little baby Alexes running around. And, that's cool. I think that's grounding in its own light. I think there's more things to focus on now that are carry more importance. It's there are multiple ways to live life. One of those ways is to focus on things that happened in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Another way is to be okay, things happened to me in the past. In addition to that, there are a lot of cool things happening now, and I'm going to give that my attention.
Yeah.
Sort of to what you just said earlier.
Right.
The EMDR work is interesting because it is very focused on my childhood. We've spent a lot of time doing that. And it's also been fascinating because my EMDR professional, my EMDR therapist, is very sensitive, I think, to any idea of childhood trauma. And she has been, I've explained, hey, here's the environment I grew up in. And she's been very quick to be supportive and hey, that was really tough, and almost critical of, I don't want to say critical of my parents, but she's been on, take it a spectrum. And maybe I unfairly place you, Dr. Steve, over here in terms of hey, this isn't just the parents' fault.
Mm-hmm.
She's more on this side. It was it's the parents' fault.
Yeah.
Which has been really interesting because it allows me to compare.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it's a little uncomfortable, right? Because I'm hey, when we talked about this, I was I don't want to be in an environment where you are planting things into my head.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not saying you are, but this is a concern that I have, that I'm going to be led to conclusions.
Yeah.
We talked about that, and she was the work will be, I'll give you prompts and you're just going to go where your brain takes you. But it was a little unsettling to be I'm sort of trusting you, and you're coming at me with these strong statements.
Yeah, and excuse me, the challenge with that, EMDR is a specific protocol to work with trauma.
Yeah.
And so if you're coming to me and I'm an EMDR trained person, I'm going to look for trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to, that's what that's what I do.
Yeah.
And the other thing we know about trauma is that each person's trauma, each person who's exposed to something has a different reaction to that thing, whether they experience it as traumatic or less traumatic or more traumatic. You know,
It's all
that
relative.
is relative. That is highly idiosyncratic, and so one person's trauma might be another person's inconvenience. And
To make an analogy, it's like if someone got hit by a car when they were 6 years old, and someone else, their cat died when they were 6 years old. They might hold those events as equally traumatic.
maybe.
And the person who got hit by the car is going to be like, wait a minute, your cat dying is not nearly as intense as me
Right.
getting hit by a car. However, that person whose cat died, they never got hit by a car. So in their world, they don't have that comparison. Relative to them, that was a really, sad, hurtful moment.
And you don't know, like one person on the one hand, the other on the other. You don't know what kind of internal resources they had. You don't know what kind of family environment.
totally.
You don't know what the kind of cultural experience they're having. They don't know, do they feel threatened the moment they walk out of their apartment?
Yeah.
Is the cat the only thing I've got that understands me? And now it's gone. And
And I would like to share more, and I feel comfortable sharing more. This is going to have to do with how I grew up and my environment. And I feel comfortable. I feel like I'm at a place where and I guess this is where I feel uncomfortable, is like, I don't want to come across as I am inaccurately describing things, right? Because, I'm beholden to my memory.
Yeah.
And I don't want to make, accusations based on memory, because memory is valuable. But what we talked about a lot in the EMDR couple of sessions, and something that I'm working through, is that I grew up in a family. My family dynamic was that my dad had he's like pretty normal dad, but had a problem with anger. A very 0 to 100 kind of guy.
Short fuse.
And I think what I'm excited to kind of work through is, more specifically, the word that I describe it as is just rage, which I don't know. I mean, perhaps you know the difference between anger and rage, but the way I define it is like, everyone gets angry. I'm angry because of something that happened. I want to express this anger. But growing up, there were a lot of instances where it's like my dad would just lose control. Like he'd get to a point where he'd be just enraged, and it's like, okay, it doesn't matter what you say. He'd get the look on his face. It's kind of like, with maybe the Hulk or something. It's like, oh, he's, scatter, just run, because there's nothing you can say. There's no reason. It's like he's in rage mode. You got to get out. And I think exposure to that as a kid helped me develop this ability to be like, okay, I am in danger. Like, I feel like I'm in danger. There's nowhere I can go because I'm in a house. It's not like I can just get in my car and leave.
Right.
So I got to sort of sequester in my mind, sort of a situation. So we've been talking about that, which is the first time I've been really working through that in a very long time.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, again, I don't want to go down a road where we start talking about things that like aren't necessarily true, but I definitely know how I felt, and I know what the experience was like.
Yeah.
And it's not something that I talk about very often, but it was really challenging. And the more I think about it, the more like this is a super sensitive subject for me. But it was always it's so challenging to be a kid, to be in an environment where it's like, okay, clearly what's happening is not your fault and it's totally outside your control. But when you're a child, you have no idea. You assume you've done something wrong. Like, for example, if there was ever like an accident, we'd be met with, it could be rage, right? It's like, okay, Alex, you forgetting a book at home that you needed to bring to school. Like, in the grand scheme of things, you're 6 years old.
Right.
It's an accident. You didn't do it on purpose. But when you're met with rage, you immediately are like, oh God, I've done something terribly wrong, but you can't.
The end of the world.
So it's been really trippy to sort of exhausting to go through that. And
and that sets up a way of thinking about dealing with hard emotions, strong emotions, right? If I don't want to tick somebody off because that if I trigger the Hulk reaction, then it's not safe anymore. That's very different. Getting to that rageful place is very different than someone who's expressing their anger and their hurt and their sadness and things like that.
The thing about rage for me is that it always felt like I knew I wasn't, like my life wasn't in danger, but it always triggered that feel, like almost that like fight or flight.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, it was like, oh, okay, we are in danger. We need to leave. Like,
yeah, because you don't know.
You don't know.
And then over time, as you grow up and you mature, and if that's your parents' response, if that's your dad's response, you're like, this is just what he does.
Yeah, totally.
You become a teenager and go, I'm over it, Dad. This is your kind of BS, rageful response. And that's when a lot of people's relationships with their parents fracture, is because you get more of an adult understanding about how your parents have been dealing with things or not dealing with things. And you go, I'm done with this. I'm not, you don't have anything to offer me, right? That's the hard part. The cool part would be if you can talk to your dad about this and he goes, and if he's able to say things today, like, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
But no, imagine him saying, I was at a different place in my life. Or if awesome. If he's still in that rageful place, you might be in a position where you say, Dad, this had a real impact on me.
Yes.
And it hooks into how I deal with conflict in my workplace environment, in my intimate relationships with women, or and I worry about the impact that's going to have when I become a father. Like, am I just going to default for this, fly off the handle kind of a response?
I've written. You look on my computer, I have like 3 different versions of letters I've written. Right. I think about this conversation a lot.
Like to your dad?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think another difficult element of that was after these fits of rage, it was met with, we would be ignored. Like we would be with, okay, so it would be incident, whether it's like dropping a glass or not finishing vegetables or something like that. And then it would be rage. And then it would be like, I'm not talking to you until you apologize to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole experience was really challenging for me, because it was like, you would assume I would assume I did something wrong, but I was like, I'm pretty sure I didn't do anything, like, it's not like I was being naughty.
Mm-hmm.
I was just being a human, but I got to apologize. But my pride is like, well, I don't want to apologize. I feel like you did something wrong to me.
Yeah. Not even related to the glass that I tipped over or whatever. Yeah.
I would love for you to apologize to me too, but I got to be the one to apologize as a 8-year-old or a 10-year-old. And, it's kind of tough, but going to my dad and trying to have any kind of conversation would immediately be like, well, I don't want to talk about this. You're wrong. And it's disrespectful for you to even suggest this. So I'm done. I'm not talking to you until you come and apologize to me for even bringing it up.
So it repeats the pattern.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I mean, I remember probably 2 years ago, I was visiting them in Florida, and he and I got into an argument because, he had been saying some things that I just straight up found offensive. And I know he kind of does this thing where he's like, loves to get a rise out of people.
Mm.
But he was just getting to the point where the things he was saying, they weren't particularly clever. They were just sort of, you're clearly just saying these rude things that are borderline hateful things. And I'm sick of it. Stop doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said something to him, and it triggered this whole thing of respect. I'm your elder. How dare you?
Mm.
And he didn't talk to me for the rest of the time.
You were there on the
trip. And then he had to take me to the airport. He didn't say a word to me. He drove me to the airport. I said goodbye to him. He didn't say a word. I got out of the car. He drove off. And it's weird to experience that as an adult. And it's so triggering because, I have like 1,000 experiences of that when I was, 2 years old, 3 years old. Probably not 2 or 3.
So he has his tantrums.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a tantrum.
Totally.
Adults throw them just as easily as toddlers do.
Yeah. So
and there may come a day when he decides he doesn't want a tantrum anymore.
I hope so. And honestly, I was thinking a lot about like, okay, Alex, is this something you feel comfortable talking about on the podcast? Because this includes someone else. I've gotten to the point where I feel like it is reasonable. The bed has been made over a period of 30 years.
Yeah.
If there was a problem with it, they had 30 years to make the bed differently or address the fact that the bed was made this way. This is something that has affected my entire life. It's coming up, and I feel like it's within my right to work through it. And granted, this is a bit publicly, but hopefully that, man, if it spurs a conversation, that would be great.
Or it may repeat the pattern where you've outed me, you've made me feel a certain way, and
well, that's just another day at the office. I've done that a million times.
You're dead to me until you apologize for saying and take that podcast down.
Yeah, which we've had similar things where it's like, I do something, it causes a big reaction. I got to go apologize, but at least it advances the ball in terms of, okay, can we talk about what's going on here?
Yeah, right. But the other thing is, you think about your dad's world. Like, if this is a way that he goes about interacting with people, you're not the only one he's interacting
Correct.
with. Like, this is something mom has had to deal with.
Yep.
This is something your brothers had to deal with.
Yep.
Right? Maybe coworkers, maybe his family. I don't know, your dad's siblings, right? Siblings and friends. And so I take heart that that maybe there's going to be a time when he comes around and says, I'm too old to be throwing tantrums.
Yeah, I would love that.
I'm done with this, and I've pushed people away. And yes, I've pushed people away, but there's still enough people. I mean, that's the other thing. Like, there's still enough that we do get together every now and then. But if the overall experience has been, I tend to push people away, it'd be great for him to say, I want to figure out if there's a different way to do things. I want to, like, maybe my rage and my anger is not everybody else's fault.
And that would be wonderful. I'm not in a place where I'm ready to let go of how I felt receiving the rage and receiving the shame on you for causing me to feel this way with your lack of respect and you being a terrible person.
Yeah.
And I've alluded to this earlier because we've talked about this idea of like, well, if you have these conflicts, why don't you go have be a scientist, not a lawyer.
Yeah.
The reason I feel like a lawyer is because I've carried a lot of, it's just tough to manage someone else's, rage sucks. It's really not pleasant to see in someone who's 10 times your size.
Yeah. When you have to duck and cover.
Yeah. That can be a traumatic thing.
No doubt.
And,
no doubt. And it shouldn't have happened.
And I think that's why I'm sensitive to my.
Do you hear me?
I hear you.
It shouldn't have happened.
It shouldn't have happened. It did happen.
We want adults to be able to calm themselves down.
Totally.
We want adults to realize it's my job to make a safe environment for you.
And it's like, regardless of what I'm feeling, maybe I do feel angry. Maybe I do feel like my boundaries are being pushed, but that's something I can control, and I can take a moment to take a breath.
As an adult.
Yep.
Right.
And not unleash primal rage onto...
That's why we call these the terrible twos. I mean, there's child developmentalists who probably hate me for saying that, but we call them the terrible twos because these are kids who are learning how to navigate this and regulate their emotions.
Yep.
And they're trying to figure out, can't I just throw my food all over the place?
Yeah.
Can't I just take a dump anywhere I want to? Can I smear feces on the wall?
Yeah.
I mean, we work with kids, and it's on the adult. It's on the adult to say, you're in this stage where you're trying to figure
You're just a kid.
emotional
You don't know
regulation
anything.
out.
Just a
And
dumb
my
kid.
job is to keep my shit together
Yes.
so I don't make it worse.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
And that's my total job, is to not make it worse while you're trying to regulate these huge emotions that you're having. And you're, I mean, from a child development perspective, you're realizing you're no longer just a part of your mother, an extension of your mother. You are this thing that has to navigate the world.
Yep.
And somehow we've got to give the kid the message, hey, these emotions, they're great, but there are boundaries. You've got to
Totally.
figure out boundaries, and you've got to,
Actions have consequences.
That's
if you
right.
continue to act this way, there's going to be a consequence. It doesn't mean you're horrible. It doesn't mean I
Right.
hate you.
Exactly.
I'm not going to yell and scream and throw things. And
but a lot of people don't get that. They don't get it as kids, and then they grow up and they don't give it as parents.
that's what I'm. So, I think that's why I'm so uncomfortable with my rage that I feel,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm so.
Am I going to become like my dad?
Which
Have I become my dad?
Yeah. Am I going to allow a child who doesn't know any better and is developing to receive? Am I going to lose it in front of my kid someday? And, you know,
Or when the new guy on the rink comes
Yeah,
and starts
yeah.
hitting people or raising the puck and violating some of the rules, are you going to
lose control.
lose control and rage all over him,
Yep.
or are you going to figure out a different way to deal with it?
And I think what also is troubling for me personally too is so I have all these feelings, you know, that we've just been talking about.
Yeah.
Just if I seem normal, like inside it's been like lava, bubbly, like a lot of emotions running around. I feel all this intense stuff. I also, you know, keep in mind, I'm sure as a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 14-year-old, I was frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
Like I did stuff, I
Sure.
misbehaved. Like I wasn't perfect. You know, Haley tells me what she was like as a kid, you know, and she was like, I would do my homework. I'd be in bed by bedtime. I was like, damn, your parents probably loved you, right? I was the exact opposite. Do I have some responsibility, right? Do I bear some responsibility? And my approach to all this stuff, and right, talking about family and, you know, nobody's perfect. Yeah, 1,000,000%. I still, in spite of all this, I love my parents.
Of course.
My dad calls me, he needs me, done. I'll do it. It's just tough to reconcile. I mean, doing this EMDR work and having them be like, think about a time. And I think about a very specific moment.
Yeah. Right.
And I was 6 years old, you know, to go through that. It's like, no wonder I started running away in my brain or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's been trippy, and it's been hard for me to keep the anger at bay in terms of like wanting to pick up the phone and be like, look what you did to me.
Yeah.
That's not the way. I know that, but I still have that feeling.
And I think that I think that can change.
Yeah.
I think, you know, much like we just talked about child development, I think there's adult development as well, right? Right. Your dad, he lives in your mind with the memory you have of him when you were a 6-year-old. And maybe he hasn't changed much, but he is still capable of changing. He is still capable of going,
Yes.
of being able to come to you and say, I wish I had a do-over. You know, I wish I could have done something different. Probably one of the most healing moments I've had with my dad. My dad's passed away now, but one of the most healing moments was reminding him of a disciplinary tactic that he used on me. And we were just talking about that in conversation. He came up to me later that night. This was years ago when he was still alive. He came to me later that night and said, I'm so sorry for how I did that. I had forgotten that I did that to you, and I wish I could do that again.
How
I wish
did you-
not do it again, but I wish I could
do it over.
do it over in a different way. I didn't know what to do to help you, and I thought I was helping. I thought I was breaking you of a bad and a habit that people were going to tease you. You know, anyway.
How did you bring it up to him in a non-contemptuous, angry manner?
We were just talking about stuff that went on when we were kids and stuff. Like, I remember the time Dad did this, and he was distraught by the memory, and he came back and he said,
I mean, that would be so healing for me to experience
it was
that.
for me. I think so. I agree with
Yeah.
you.
I just don't know that I would be able to. The second I bring it up, he'd be looking for like, so you're trying to say this is my fault? Like he'd be looking for the angle. You're trying to get at, you know, you're trying to insult me, or he'd be looking for the angle. And also too, I want to state, I have memories that are unpleasant. I have tons of memories of my dad being supportive,
Of course.
loving,
Of course.
being there for me,
Of course.
encouraging me.
This is the other thing that, like when you put your therapist on one end of the continuum, like your parents were very traumatic, inducing people, and me over here like, The reality is that we're both, right?
Yeah.
We terrorize our kids and we elevate them, and we're the best of times and we're the worst of times, to go from a tale of two cities. That's what the first sentence in that book. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, and so much potential in so much of my potential is locked up in how my parents treated me and how much I showed up and couldn't show up, or how they didn't show up and how they would show up.
Yeah. And I think my big takeaway is like, I don't want to create an expectation that a human being cannot be a human being and have flaws.
Yeah.
I think my expectation is like, if you have flaws or you've done things that you know are wrong, to just say, hey, this wasn't the best way.
I could have done better.
Yeah.
I wish I could have done better.
And I wouldn't respond with no shit. I wouldn't rub it in their face. I'd say, thank you so much. Like,
yeah,
you did a lot of great stuff.
so liberating.
I understand that there was some, but the fact that you love me enough to come and say this to me reaffirms like, okay, I am worth it. I'm not a bad kid, and I'm not a worthless piece of shit. You do love me, and I love you too, and I forgive you.
And I think the thing that therapy does or can do is it can be a place where you can have these trial runs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you can fantasize about, wow, could I go talk to my dad that way? Or, wow, this happened in my therapist's life. Could it happen in my life as well?
Yep.
Or
Yep.
it unlocks possibilities.
Yeah. As opposed to just never doing anything about it.
Right. Like, this lives in my brain.
Forever.
The trauma as a 6-year-old that I experienced lives in my brain. And that's the way my dad is. He's unchangeable. He's immutable.
Yeah. I remember you said this, I recommend all adults talk to their parents. And I think I've been thinking about this very thing when I started therapy. I was like, okay, one of these days I'm going to confront my parents. I'm going to talk to them. So I've been thinking about this for 15 years, 16 years. I worry that I'll never do it.
Yeah.
And they'll pass away, and I'll just be stuck with this. Here are all the things I wish I could have said to you guys.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that reminds me of a saying, like my folks' generation. Yeah, we need to wrap up. My folks' generation was great with, like, they would memorize poems and stuff, and they would quote Shakespeare.
Yeah.
So the one poem that I've memorized is from Harriet Beecher Stowe, or saying, maybe not even a poem. The bitterest tears shed over graves are for words left unsaid and deeds left undone. And I think about that when I think about inviting our parents to engage in repair work, inviting our parents to consider what my experience of them was like, and being able to say, I get it, you did your best, but it was still hard on me, and I'm not holding that over you, and I'm not using that to trash you and your memory. I have both. I have great memories, and I have these really painful experiences, and I'm not saying this because I want to shove it in your face.
Yeah.
I want to move beyond it. And I see you in all your complicatedness, because now I'm you. I have all my complicatedness. I'm the SOB who loses his temper sometimes, and I'm the guy who can elevate someone. I live with Hitler inside me, and I live with Mother Teresa inside me. That's the human capability, right? To be as evil as Hitler and as amazing as Gandhi.
Yeah. And as loving and peaceful as Gandhi.
Right.
Yeah. And to sort of bring this to a conclusion, the EMDR work so she just had surgery, so she's out for like 3 weeks. So I'm going to do nothing for 3 weeks, but then I'm going to pick it back up. Mm-hmm. But I am, that it's kicking up a lot of stuff, and
I'll bet
I'm hopeful though that kicking it up maybe will lead to some sort of healing and stuff like that. So stay tuned.
If nothing else, I think you've been a big believer in trusting the process.
Yeah, 100%, which you guys better know what you're doing.
I hope so, yeah.
I'm putting a lot of faith in you guys.
George knows what he's doing. That's
Yeah, he does. He better. Everyone, all therapists listening, you better know what you're doing because we're putting our fate in your hands. I'm just kidding. Or am I?
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Steve's got to catch a flight because he's got to go speak to 1,000 students.
No, different. But
yeah.
I do have to catch a flight.
So thank you for your time, Dr. Steve. Great to see you.
All right.
And everyone else out there, stay happy.
Take care.
Bye.